According to experts, the cheapest sports car that money could buy in 2023 was a Chevy Camaro 1LS, which cost about 28 grand. Now, the best bang for your buck if you want a true sports car experience is probably still the Miata, which is pretty much the same price as the Camaro. In 1966, upon its release, the original Camaro was the equivalent of about 23 grand. And let's be real, there's no comparing early Camaros in their day to something like the 1LS. The original Mustang was even less, but it wasn't exactly a sports car. Going back a bit and over to England, really the home of affordable sports cars, a stock 1958 Austin Healey Sprite, which is kind of like the original Miata, would run you the equivalent of about 20K today. And those cars, and the Midget only got cheaper. A 72 MG Midget really had only gotten better and cost even less than that. And through its run, the Midget stayed what would be today a sub $20,000 car brand new. And then, of course, these cars were dirt cheap used. Through their respective runs, the bigger MGB and Triumph TR6 were under what would be 30K today, and they were some of the best kind of regular sports cars that money could buy. Going back even further, the precursor to the Midget, that is the original MG M-Type, cost around $10,000 in today's dollars. And it's cars like that that made the British automotive industry a thing. This idea of affordable fun, of the sports car not really needing loads of power and comfort features, but rather just being a simple, lightweight, well-handling top-down roadster. That's really the kind of car that the world fell in love with, and it's why, the British sports car became a thing. Through history, the target audience for manufacturers wishing to sell sports cars has always been primarily young men. Now, are there sports car enthusiasts who are women? Of course, I would say now more than ever, just like there are apparently women who watch this channel. Okay, I would say that my demographics are even more extreme, but you get the point. Regardless of gender, the problem is actually age. Young people aren't making more money than they were in, say, 1974, where the median income here in the States was almost exactly what it is today if you factor inflation. But for some reason, our sports cars cost quite a bit more. Why is this? It's not as though making and shipping cars really cost any less back then. In fact, it probably costs more. Why hasn't the automation of the manufacturing process brought prices down? Since the 2008 recession and even the recent pandemic, we have had ongoing supply chain issues, and the big manufacturers realized that the way to maximize profits for themselves was to lean out their inventory and to raise their prices. This is in part because car owners are buying used cars at higher rates and keeping their cars longer than ever. This is also why finding a decent used car, especially from a dealer, for under 15K is pretty difficult at this point. Cars simply cost more, and this is especially true of sports cars. Couple this ongoing increase in sticker prices with our complete lack of restraint when it comes to debt, and especially the worst kind of debt, which is car loans. People my age and younger are still buying the most affordable, $30,000 to $50,000 sports cars despite not really being able to afford them. I'm sorry, but if you make $40,000 a year, you probably shouldn't buy a car that's going to cost you $40,000 or more out the door. A sports car used to be something that people saved up for or waited to purchase when they got that promotion, but not anymore. So this also makes it so that there's just no reason for manufacturers to lower their prices at all. They can keep them high because we'll buy them. What we need today is a true sports car that costs, once again, less than $20,000. But is that possible? Well, to answer that, we have to look at what makes a car a sports car. I recently heard it said that a sports car is just a car, but with all the extra stuff taken away, whether that's comfort features, unnecessary bits of tech, the bare bones of driving and experiencing the drive without anything really getting in the way of you in the car. You'd think that stripping everything back would be a way to cut costs, but that's not really the case. And let's be real, that's because making that kind of sports car today is almost impossible. I was recently watching James Martin review the Frog Eye Sprite, and he pointed out that these old cars not only show us how far we've come and all the things that we do better today, but they also show us the stuff that we actually don't do as well. No modern car can give you that direct connection to the road that an old car like that Frog Eye Sprite can, and I can confirm this having owned and driven an early MG Midget, which is the same car. Nothing modern handles like this. It's not that it's better in terms of actually going fast around a turn, it just feels more visceral, which I think is what you're going for when you get a sports car. It's more of a feeling that you're trying to experience. These cars teach us that what we're chasing isn't actually horsepower and speed or lap times, but rather the illusion of power and speed that comes from a more direct, raw driving experience. And actually, less power and less speed means more fun because you can actually use most of the car's capabilities on a regular road without breaking the law. You know, an old car like that Frog Eye Sprite, you can hammer through all the gears as fast as you want before you hit 40 miles an hour. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the British manufacturers didn't find any shame in selling a car like the Sprite or Midget or Triumph Spitfire that literally made 50 to 60 horsepower, and in the early years, quite a bit less than that. We're talking about cars that did 0 to 60 in like 18 seconds and had top speeds of under 100 miles per hour. They were unequivocally slow. Speed and power just wasn't the point. Now you might say, oh, all cars were just slow then. Well, that is not true at all. At that point, you could go spend the equivalent of, $100,000 or more and buy yourself a car that did 0 to 60 in like 6 seconds. It was just that there was this old idea in England of what a sports car could be that was continuing to carry over from the good old days when they really kind of invented these small sports cars, and they kept it going even as the bigger, faster, more expensive cars just got more ridiculous and more powerful. They just kept making these little cars as well, which is something that for some reason we can't do today. Which brings us to the question, could a sports car like that, something like an MG Midget, could it exist today for around that $20,000 mark? When you remove the need for bigger, faster, more powerful, and even more tech and features, when you simplify what the car is down to that pure formula, you should save some money, right? Of course that's true, and we see this with cars like the Honda Fit, a car that can be had brand new for well under $20,000. So hear me out. I have owned, and I know multiple people who have owned Honda Fits, people like me who aren't necessarily tiny, who love to drive these cars, and the kinds of things that I and everyone says about why it's fun to drive a Honda Fit is the same kind of thing you hear about those who love driving old British roadsters. It's like driving a go-kart. If there's going to be a new equivalent to something like the MG Midget, it would need to be something like a rebodied Honda Fit. Because let's be real, it's just not very sporty looking. You can keep pretty much everything. Keep the engine, drivetrain, maybe tweak the suspension a bit, maybe make it a manual. And if it looked good and came in some cool colors and cost 17 grand new, they would sell like crazy. For someone like myself, the solution is pretty simple though. I would rather just go straight to the source and get an old sports car. There are loads of amazing classic sports cars that have been taken care of and can be had for so little. It doesn't even have to be a British car. You could get yourself a Gen 1 Miata. You could get yourself something like an Alfa Romeo Spider 124. But for me, it probably wouldn't be my main car. I mean, a Gen 1 Miata can be certainly, but probably not an old MG Midget. So for those who are on a budget who just want one car and they want it to be a fun sports car, they have to go used. They can't get it for new. And that's okay, but I just wish there was a manufacturer who would pursue the same kind of thing we saw with the Miata, but at a much more affordable price. I mean, even the Miata, upon its release, was the equivalent of over $30,000. And that's because a Miata has always been a more capable sports car than the kind of sports car I'm talking about. The Miata is much more like, a Lotus Elan or an MGB than it is like something like the MG Midget. What would be even more interesting is if a manufacturer set out to do what Mazda did with the Miata and build a fun but thoroughly slow go-kart-like car that maybe lies somewhere between, the old tiny British roadsters and something like a new Miata. Maybe not 50 horsepower, but maybe less than 180 horsepower like the base Miata. So maybe 100 horsepower and maybe 110 mile per hour top speed. That's perfect. Sadly, this isn't going to happen. Seems the affordable sports car is dead and nobody's all that interested in trying to bring it back. So I guess you and I will just have to either buy used or buy classic. Now, I would love to hear from you guys on this topic. Maybe there's another sub $20,000 car that could fit that fun niche better than something like the Honda Fit. So let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And until next time, drive safe.